All right, so in this video, we're going to kind of do a quick incorporation of chapters 10, 11, and 12, focusing on chapter 11 here. But just so you know, we're going to be bouncing around a little bit, looking at public opinion and political action. So first thing that you need to look at in this chapter is the idea of demographics, right? Measuring characteristics about a population. And how we do that, all right, is the census taken every 10 years. All right, we count the population, and that way we get a better understanding of needs, who's out there, what the government should be providing, as well as, of course, representation. So by doing this, a lot of times we figure out kind of finally where we fall racially within the country. So this graph is showing us kind of the idea of who and what races are growing and which ones are shrinking in our country. So what we really look at in this chapter is how, and in political science, is how will changing demographics impact political parties. Okay, it's going to alienate some people, maybe not even joining a party. It's going to bring more people into a party. It kind of all depends. So demographics plays a huge role in political parties. All right, so looking at the American people, all right, what we can see is that there's some definite regional shifts that kind of happen. All right, so remember reapportionment, right, which is the process of reallocating seats in the House of Representatives every 10 years using that census, okay, leads to some different shifts. All right, so as we get these numbers and then we begin to redistrict, all right, of course, it's the state legislatures that do that. Remember, we can get shifts within the regions because of growing in certain areas, okay? All right, the American people. Oh man, my parents. The graying of America, okay? The fastest growing group are the people over the age of 65, which also leads to the fact that this is potentially going to drain, right, our Social Security. It is 2020. We still have one. It is a little painful. There are more baby boomers who are retiring and withdrawing Social Security than there are people in the workforce still supplying money to the Social Security. So we're at a little bit of a standstill there. All right, this group of people typically is kind of sometimes called the gray power. All right. And basically their advantage is that no other group is like this because we all eventually get there, right? We get older. And so at some point, we're all part of the graying power. And they have a lot of say. They have a lot of power, right? So the idea is they always vote. It does not matter the weather. It does not matter the time of year. It does not matter anything. They will get to the polls. They will get their ballot mailed. They will vote, right? Versus the people 18 to 30 who would rather sit at home and watch a movie or TikTok than go to the poll and cast a vote. So that's why a lot of political parties listen to, right, the gray power. All right, so let's look at political socialization, right? This is a little bit of chapter 10, but the idea is it's the process, all right, of how you acquire your political orientation. Where do you get your influences? And like we talked about last time, right, family, schools, peers, media, social environments, all of these things play a huge significant role, and a lot of times leads to your shifting and growing ideas throughout your upper educational years. Okay, so life cycle effects. So this is the idea that dispositions that change with age or membership in a group experiencing the same events, right? And then the generational effect, like I talked about last time, right? This is the exposure across ages and groups to the same political information, okay? These are all things that are going to influence your political socialization. So let's look at the demographics, all right, and voter turnout, all right? Basically what we're saying here is that these are the things that tend to increase the chance of someone willing to vote. Typically higher incomes, typically older, typically well-educated, typically sort of white, but not necessarily anymore, right? Typically Northerners, but I would argue probably not anymore. Union members definitely get out and they vote all the time. And then in government employees, definitely have a high voter turnout, okay? All right, so that's who turns out to vote. Now let's look at some of the ideas of polling, okay? So this is the idea of gathering public opinion and polling. We all sort of frown on polling these days because they've been mostly wrong all the time, but let's just talk about them anyway. So there's a couple different types of polls. There's the random sampling, which is the key technique employed by survey researchers. This operates on the principle that everyone should have an equal probability of being selected for the sample, right? Then there's the representative sample, which is just drawing from all groups, okay? There's the typical sample size is about 1,500, all right? And then the sampling error is just the level of confidence in these polls is usually a plus or minus 3%, okay? So why do polls matter? This is still probably debatable today, but it tends to help politicians figure out what in the world the public wants, right? What should be part of their platform, what shouldn't, what worked in the debate, what didn't. Exit polls are also really big because they typically are used by the media to predict election day winners. However, 2016, this was not valid. So the exit polls showed a clear majority going towards Hillary Clinton, which she did get the popular vote, but the electoral votes went to Trump. So therefore, a lot of the media was declaring, oh, well, clearly this is going to be our winner. But it wasn't, okay? Because though she had the numbers for the popular vote, she did not have the electoral votes. So exit polls, not so reliable anymore. All right, so polls also reflect the policy agenda, right? So problems that people inside and outside of government believe must be addressed. So the policy agenda is something that this is where we should be focusing on. So politicians look at the polling and they say, ooh, we need to bring this up in, right, the Senate or in the House, or we need to make this part of our platform or something like that. So policy agenda is really influenced by polls. So some trends. Americans don't know much about politics because they know about the people. They don't know about the process. Americans, okay, may know the basic beliefs, but not how these beliefs actually affect policies of the government. So they might be sitting there and saying, well, I'm part of this party and I believe this. Why aren't they doing something about it? But, well, you actually are in the minority of the party that thinks that that's something that they should be focusing on right then. Okay, and then 25% of the public trusts the government most of the time or always. I don't know who that 25% is, but they're out there and they trust the government. Okay, so looking at ideology, right? Ideology is the set of beliefs about politics, public policy, and public purpose. What is the role of government and where should we be focusing? So looking at the Republican Party coalition, majority are rural voters or farmers, white males, typically business owners, conservative Christians, college educated. Though this has changed, and actually some data now shows that it's less college education that is in the Republican Party coalition. All right, so the Democratic coalition typically falls in urban centers, typically union members because the Democrats are very strong on unions. They typically are Hispanics and African Americans and other minorities. They have a high school diploma, all right, and oftentimes have advanced degrees, okay? So then there's the gender gap, okay? This is kind of significant. So women tend to vote for the Democratic candidates at higher rates than Republican candidates, whereas men support Republican candidates at higher rates than women. This is not a guarantee. This definitely flips and this flops, right? In 2016, there were quite a significant number of women that actually voted for Trump. And then in 2020, they didn't vote for Trump. So it flips around. Right. So ideological beliefs, right? Let's look at liberals. They tend to be more on social spending, like, yes, put money into welfare. Yes, put money into Medicare and Medicaid, and let's do these things. Tend to be pro-choice, tend to favor affirmative action, tend to favor progressive taxation, tend to be pro same-sex marriage. Notice that I'm saying tend because just because you don't agree with one of these things doesn't make you a non-liberal, but also just because you're a liberal doesn't mean like this is your whole world, right? A lot of people kind of fall in the middle. So conservatives tend, right, to be all about more military spending, tend to be pro-life, tend to oppose affirmative action, tend to believe that we should keep taxes low, and tend to support traditional marriage between a man and a woman. Okay, again, not always, if you're a liberal or conservative, do you have all of these beliefs. All right, so political participation are basically all the activities used by citizens to influence leaders, okay, influence policies, okay. Conventional participation, right, is all about just voting, working on campaigns, contacting elected officials, right? So that's the conventional system. All right, then there's the political system, which is you as people can organize and influence policy and political leaders, okay? And it happens regularly now. So, how do we do this? Protests as participation, right? Protesting is a form of political participation designed to achieve a policy, all right? Peaceful protest are people gathering, all right? But remember what I said, the minute you pick up a rock and throw it, it is no longer a peaceful protest. Okay. Civil disobedience is a form of political participation that reflects a decision to break a law believed to be immoral and to suffer the consequences. And this was a lot of what Martin Luther King Jr. did, right? Believing that laws dictating segregation were immoral and unjust. So to break those and challenge those was the way to bring about a political and policy change in segregation. So Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movements really focused on civil disobedience. And I mean all of the civil rights movements. I mean the African Americans. I mean the American for Disabilities. I need the GLBTQ, American Indian. All of these groups used civil disobedience to try to influence policy. All right, this is just an image on class, inequality, and participation, right? Income level, all right, versus engagement and activity. The idea being that very low income, not so much. You maybe go to a rally, right? And then high to very high income, you're giving money to people, you're donating to things, all right, you're trying to influence stuff. All right, guys, that's what you got. So update your vocabulary. Be sure your notes are ready. If you have any questions, come to class with questions. And until next time.